Hello and welcome to Let's Pod This. My name is Andy Moore. It's good to be back with you. We took last week off. You may have noticed if you're a regular listener. If you're a new listener, welcome. We've been here every week for the last 5 years. I mean, pretty close to true. This is, I think, episode 212 of a nearly weekly podcast. Joining me today is my co-host for almost all of those episodes, Dr. Scott Melson. Hello, sir.
Hey, man. How are you?
I'm well. Happy Friday to you.
It is hot.
Yeah, both of us have struggled with air conditioners that have buckled under the pressure of the oppressive Oklahoma heat.
This heat, man. It's too much. It's about to do me in. It's like this heat is like the Oklahoma legislature. It has no redeeming qualities.
Keep going.
And it does, and it never stops. Apparently,
That's right.
You get a special session. You get a special session.
That's right. Well, let's talk about where things are at. We are in special sessions. Dos special sessions.
The second and third special sessions of the, what is this, the 58th? Is this the 58th legislature? So we are still in the second special session, although only one house is still in the second special session, right?
That's debatable.
No. Yeah. Well, which one? I mean, which one's which? The second special session is the one that the governor called, and the third special session is the one that they're doing for ARPA, or is it the other way around?
I forget that. So I'm unclear on that, to be honest. I think the one the governor called is the third.
Okay.
They gavelled in for the second one while they were still in the regular session.
Yes.
So
I think the second one is the ARPA, and the governor's is the third.
Yeah. Well, maybe let's talk about what these are, because we missed last week, and I don't know that we've really. The week before that was we had Beth from Mom's Demand on talking about gun safety, and golly, the world just keeps turning. So I don't know that we've really covered the fact that we have 3 sessions this year.
It's a little bit bonkers, right? So, like, there's regular session, which ended in May on schedule. They came back after they had adjourned before sunny die and overrode some vetoes that the governor, some bills the governor said had vetoed, but they didn't override all of them. And then at that time, I think it was that week, right? They gavelled in for a special session where the point of that session
that they
called themselves. They put themselves into special session, and they put themselves into special session because they are essentially, like, I think claw back is too strong of a term, but there's all these American Rescue Plan funds that they had initially ceded authority for how to use those funds to the governor. And then the governor, 1, hadn't used a bunch of them, and 2, had used some of them in ways that the legislature didn't like. And so they called a special session and said, actually, we are going to take back that authority, and we're going to appropriate all of these American Rescue Plan funds. The legislature is going to start reviewing proposals for projects and deciding where these funds are going to go.
Right.
And then also during that week, before they sine-died from the regular session, the governor said that he was going to be calling them into a third special session specifically to provide, quote, inflation relief, right? And what that means is the governor was pissed off that they didn't cut taxes during the regular session, and the governor wants them to cut taxes. So he was calling them back in a third session to pass a tax cut. And the reason you got to do all this stuff separately is because once they sine-die, when they come into a special session, they can only do stuff in the special session that's in their, like, call, right? So anything else they want to do has to be another session, or they have to amend the call of the special session.
Yeah, and the reason we got here, as a bit of a reminder, is that earlier in session, the governor asked the legislature to very quickly pass a bill that would create a big, not a slush fund, but a set aside a big chunk of money for what they called Project Ocean, right? And we've discussed this pretty, I think, ad nauseum. This was the plan to entice Panasonic to open a battery factory in Oklahoma, or to construct and open a battery manufacturing facility here in Oklahoma, which has not happened yet. I haven't heard they said no, but they also haven't said yes, and it's been several months now. And I think we were expecting them to make a decision by now. So who knows? That at this point, they may be aware of the vitriol happening in politics across the country and just saying, we're going to wait until after November. We don't want this to be used for someone's political reelection campaign if we don't think that they're the one for us. So anyway, because the legislature did that, it was like $700 million. The legislature had been pretty open in saying, that's a lot of money that we're giving to this company. We are not, that leaves very little room, very little money left over to give tax cuts back. And to be clear, when we talk about tax cuts, it's not a lot of money. Now, I'm someone who believes that like every dollar helps, right? Like if I got, back $50 from the government, I'd be like, woo, $50. But these days that's only half a tank of gas, right? And my $50 and your $50 might be helpful. To some people, it's a ton of money, would be very helpful. But it's also ends up being a ton of money lost by the state that is otherwise appropriated to go towards education, healthcare, public services that we need. And if we don't spend it there, I'm not going to spend $50 any more wisely than some of these state programs.
Well, I mean, that's the thing, right? Is that like just while we're here, not to like beat the drum. $50. I mean, yes, there's a lot of things you can do with $50. I mean, used to you could buy a tank of gas, now you can buy half tank of gas. The cost of groceries is going up, so I think it's important that we don't say that I think it's important that we acknowledge that the kind of money that we're talking about here would be very much appreciated by lots of people, even if it is just a one-time expenditure. However, it is also true that when we're talking about taxes, this is the beauty about like a broad and progressive tax system, right? Is that when you have $50 and you get that $50 from, millions and millions of people, right? And they all contributed an average of $50, you can do a lot of things with that money that help make all of our lives better and our kids' lives better, right? And so it really is, especially when you consider how difficult it is to raise taxes in the state of Oklahoma when needed. I mean, it really is worth asking the question, like, when tax rates are already historically low, is it worth doing this?
Well, we've been here before, right?
Right.
In 2014, I think, or before then, the state cut income tax rates, and it resulted in a disastrous scenario where our state was then short
like $1.5 billion.
Yeah. And then the next year short $900 million. Like, it was an ongoing problem that we finally dug ourselves out of just a couple of years ago.
Right.
And now that there's a little extra money floating around from the feds, they're starting to be like, oh, well, let's just
one-time funds, no less, right? One-time funds.
Right. As our country like nears a large-scale economic slowdown, if not a full-on recession, right? Like, this is perhaps not the best time to spend your savings.
Well, and we haven't even talked about the fact that we haven't talked about the fact that tax cuts are not at all going to reduce inflationary pressure, right? Like, as much as it might help people pay for things, really, if you're going to talk about fiscal, not physical, but if you're going to talk about fiscal policy that would be the most anti-inflationary, it would actually be sharp tax hikes on the highest earners, right? That's
in order to
curb spending and
try to pull the economy, right? Yeah,
pull some money out of the economy. Pretty sharp tax increases on the highest earners is the actual economic policy that might have the highest impact on inflation. But so I think that's off the table.
And it's just a little comedic to me to hear our state lawmakers act like they can make a decision that's going to turn inflation around in our country, which is not the case. Like, the cost, no matter what the state lawmakers do, they're not going to drop the price of milk, right? Not substantially.
I would also, there's 103 members in the House, right? 103, 105? 101 members in the House, and how many in the Senate?
48.
48. So that's 149 members. How do you think of the 149 members? How many of you think can explain inflation?
Oh, yeah.
Where it is, what it comes
They
from,
just
why
say,
it happens?
well, okay, that's they can say prices go up, which is part of it, but that's not the why, right?
Right. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. How many members of the Oklahoma State Legislature you think can explain inflation?
Right. Probably more than we would guess, but your point is there's not a lot of economists up there, right?
Right. And certainly I'm not one. I just follow a lot of them on Twitter. So
Right.
you
Well,
know,
and and we don't want to go too far the other way where the pendulum swings from inflation to deflation or stagflation, as we like to say.
right. Right. Which is what happened in the late 70s and early 80s. And this is thing where because we're kind of getting to and this is you mentioned we've been on for 5 years. What I'm about to say, I've said this over and over again. I said it to I'm pretty sure I said it to Leader Eccles when he was on the show with us virtually in the beginning of 2020. What's so frustrating is that we have leaders in our state right now who think that there is one answer to every problem. No matter what the problem is, the answer, at least in terms of fiscal policy, is to cut taxes. And that's just not true. There are times when raising taxes is the best thing that you can do for the economy. There are other times when cutting taxes is the best thing that you can do for the economy, right? But if all you ever do is cut taxes, then when you need to cut them, you can't because you've cut them so much already that you literally can't afford to, right? And then you put yourself in the situation where when you need to raise them, there's no political will to do it, right? It's
Which is
just
what
it's
happened
just
for 30 years from
right.
1992 to
Two, right.
2018. Yeah.
Right. So, we'll see what happens. There was a lot of drama this week. The House went into the House. This is actually kind of funny. It's kind of awesome. If it
It is.
wasn't so dysfunctional, you're just, that GIF of Michael Jackson with popcorn in the movie theater, right? So the House goes into I guess the third special session, and they pass all these bills. They pass bills, cutting the grocery tax. They pass bills cutting the state income tax.
And multiple of these, right? Like they've
Yes,
passed more than one.
different versions of all of
Yeah.
these things.
Yeah.
Right.
If you're buying shoes online and you buy them in like 3 different colors just to see which one, or 3 different sizes because you're not sure if you're
Yes.
like a 10, a 10 and a half, or an 11. They
Yes.
did that with bills,
Yes.
many of which conflict with one another, and many of which, if they were all passed, would like result in disastrous consequences for our state.
Right. Right. And so they passed all these bills with apparently no discussion with the Senate, no discussion with the governor's office. They just passed them, and then they adjourned sine die. Right now, this is where it gets tricky. They did something that in all the time that I have spent watching the legislature, they adjourned sine die, but they said because they usually say when the clerk's desk is clear, we move to adjourn. But this time they said when the clerk's desk is clear, comma, and only when the clerk's desk is clear, we move to adjourn sine die. So then they're adjourned. Well, we think. But then the Senate comes back. Pro Tem Treat just issues this blistering statement and has this press conference where he's basically like, I don't know what's happening over here. The House is full of shit. We can't do anything now because they've passed all these bills and sent them to us. But even if we pass them, we can't send them back because they're adjourned. They've adjourned. They've exited special session. So we can't do anything now. In order to do anything, we'd have to start all over. We'd have to come back into another session because we've adjourned sine die. Then the House comes back and said, no, 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 no. We only our adjournment sine die adjournment only takes effect when the desk is clear. And they're like, well, then are you ever adjourned? Right? Like with
Right.
because the Senate's like, you can't leave the clerk's desk open inevitably. Then the House says we're the freaking House. It's our clerk and their desk. We can do whatever we want to. And it's just turned into this like back and forth because the undercurrent here is the Senate doesn't actually want to pass any of these bills
Right.
that the House has passed. And so rather than say they don't want to pass the tax cuts, they're saying that they can't pass the tax cuts. The House is saying that they can, and it's just a gigantic cluster because, if it wasn't like the government of our state, you would just laugh. But instead,
we still do. Yeah, this, Scott, strikes me as like, it's like when you close the office early, but one person has to, like the front desk person has to stay there, right? So you're
right,
like, no, we're still open, until Sheila's gone. We're still, but there's no one there, right? So like no
right,
actual business can happen in your office, but
right,
Sheila has to sit there until 5 o'clock or waiting for the UPS guy to come in because she needs this last package before she can close up shop. And that's
right.
kind of what the House did, is like, we're closed. It's once that package arrives. But everyone left, and then Sheila's at the desk being like, okay, I'll just wait here. And
Except it's also, though, it's a question of Sheila is at the desk, but the front door is locked, and Sheila doesn't have a key.
well, that's the Senate is at the door. Here's to extend my analogy way more than it should be. The Senate is coming down the hallway, and they're like, well, the lights are off. It looks like everyone's gone. And the House, so they call the House, hey, Charles, you guys closed? Oh, no, Sheila's there. Well, but you got to approve these things. Oh, no, just drop them off with her. It'll be fine. And the Senate's like, this feels a little fishy. This is not how it's supposed to happen, right? You're supposed to, if you're closed, I can't be here.
Well, and the thing that's interesting is, I mean, in this, we should get one of the members or former members who's a friend of the show on to make sure that we're accurate here. But I believe the only people who can enforce the legislature's rules are themselves, right?
Yeah.
They make their own rules. They're not accountable to anybody else. But then I think the question becomes, like, say the Senate decided they did want to pass one of these tax bills and they passed it, and then they quote sent it back to the House's desk, and then it went to the governor, and the governor signed it. I think there's a legitimate fear that it would immediately be challenged in court, that it hadn't actually gone through the
Yes.
constitutionally required process to become a bill.
Yes, I think that is 100% correct. I think that's Treat's perspective on this, where he's like, hang on, if we're going to do this, we got to do it right, y'all. We can't
Right.
just wing it. Yeah, and to your point, the legislature does write their own rules. They publish those rules every session. There are House specific rules and Senate specific rules, and then there are joint rules that apply to both chambers, because a lot of stuff is kind of the same, but there are some nuances that are different. And I think this is actually in the joint rules, but the House is saying, I know they're joint rules, but in our House, it's this way. It's like, there's a rule you can't jump on the couch. That's at mom's house and grandma's house. But, grandma sometimes lets you jump on the couch.
Yeah. You're right. He's saying if we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. But also he's saying, but also we're not going to do this.
No, and he was, it was real funny because, Treat said, we'll be the adults in the room like we always are. And, we can't do this. And I don't know. I can't believe the governor had signed off on it. He got hoodwinked, is what he said.
The governor, he low key called the governor stupid. Is what he did, which I found amusing.
And then the other day, the governor was like, "Well, if they don't do this, I'll just call them back into another special session." Like, it's kind of a vague threat of like, you're gonna keep coming back here until you do it the way I want you to, which is not how checks and balances work in government. And then today he was like, well, we're just going to let everyone cool off a little bit. Seems like, tempers are getting a little flared over there in the legislature. So we'll wait till next week and then readdress this. So essentially nothing happened this week.
Oh, and here's the thing. And I honestly don't know. So the Constitution says that the governor can call them into special session, and that if he does or she does, if the governor calls the legislature into special session, the legislature, they're supposed to convene, right? Like they have to. They can't just ignore it unless they do, right? Like what? Like I mean, or could they say, okay, we'll convene in special session, but we're going to do it on the first day of regular session next year. We'll convene in your special session. We'll gavel in. We'll gavel out. Like, what's the enforcement mechanism? Is the governor going to call OHP and have them go around the state and like round up the legislators. That is something that he can do.
Yeah.
But like, would he?
I mean, I believe Governor Stitt would, if that was like if our state legislature just absconded to Texas, right? I mean, Texas legislators have come to Oklahoma before for this purpose. And I think even the House Democrats did that here a couple of years ago. Didn't they leave and like went and hid out in North Texas or something? Because
I think you got it the other way around. I think the Texas Democrats did it somewhere.
I know Texas has come to Oklahoma. I thought our
Did ours
Democrats
leave
did it.
too?
I feel like that happened a few years ago when things were a little rowdy, like when Corey Williams was up there and Scott Inman. I feel like there was a back when the Democrats had an ounce of power and they could maybe they had
Deny a
enough
quorum
numbers
or
they could
something.
prevent a supermajority. So anyway, I think that could happen. I don't think it will. I think they'll come back. They'll talk a bunch this weekend and come back. I am. Well, and related to this, the Senate just appointed their members to serve on the like ARPA committee or whatever too, right?
Right.
Weren't they a little behind on that?
Yeah. And Treat created like a tax reform like
Oh, that's right.
working group
Mhm.
this week too. So the Senate, I mean, even if, whatever the governor does and whatever the outcome of this sine die versus not spat is, the Senate does not seem in any rush, appropriately, I would say, to just jam through a tax cut just because. It seems like Senator Thompson is literally and figuratively the graybeard involved in all of this, and he is not interested in having to relive some of the issues of 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, it'll be an interesting week next week. It was also more interesting this week because we had some more details illuminated about the Swadley's deal, right? So, OMES director Steve Harp is back from vacation and he gave his testimony before the investigative committee, as did a couple other folks up there. And I think, from what he said, he was not aware of the contract details with Swadley's for more than a year. Um, and he, never really even saw that, was never presented to them. And that, I think, highlights perhaps how, I don't know, how small the circle of corruption was or how locally controlled it was by just a few people that were privy to that information. Or maybe they're just trying to feign ignorance to keep from getting their ass chewed out.
Yeah, it is interesting because the legislature did seem just absolutely flabbergasted that the director of OMES would not have had more awareness of this. It's going to be real interesting to see how all this how all this shakes out and when, the whole Swadley's saga.
Because the primary election is coming up in just less than 2 weeks on
10 days.
June 28th. Listeners, if you don't already have this on your calendar, please mark it down. Tuesday, June 28th, primary election. Everybody in the state gets to vote on something, somebody. Polls are open 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. all day that day. You can vote early the weekend before or the week before. You still have time to request and return your absentee ballot. No, not request. I think that deadline's passed. But you can, if you received an absentee ballot, you have to get it in by election day. And so that means that there are some really interesting candidate issues coming out. Non-doc, thankfully, has been hosting a number of uh, public debates. Corporation Commission, Oklahoma County Attorney General, or a district attorney race, a bunch of other, the actual attorney general. Most of these have been Republican primaries because that's where most of the candidates have been. I think for almost all of these debates, there's 1, 2 Democratic candidates, so they don't have a primary. And It's been a weird week for Oklahoma County government as well, right? So there was a debate for district attorney in which one of the candidates is sitting County Commissioner Kevin Calvey. And so he's in office running for another office that could have a role in this other thing that involves the current DA, David Prater, and the current, well, now former county clerk, David Hooten. So in the last couple of weeks, there have been some pretty hefty allegations lodged against David Hooten that regarding like sexual um, uh, misconduct at work, some really bizarre comments about being genetically modified so he can't get drunk, stuff he said to his staff about taking him to do things that were scary and they would be drinking and all this stuff happening. If you haven't already read the comments, I'll link to the non-doc story in the show notes. I can't really do it justice. It's super bizarre.
I mean, we've known David Hooten is like a weird freaking guy for like a while, right? But I don't know that any of us grasp the full extent of it.
But he's like a Grammy award winner, Grammy award winning trumpeter, right?
Yeah,
He's
but
like
he's
pretty
like,
famous for his trumpet playing.
yeah, but like also like pretty weird, right?
Well, I mean,
Like,
I've never met him. He took his like official government photo with his trumpet, which I thought was a little odd, but to each his own. Maybe, I mean, if I was a Grammy award winning trumpeter, maybe I would hold it too. I don't know. But these allegations are 100% weird. And it got to the point where the DA, David Prater, filed a amendment, or excuse me, he filed an agenda item for their next meeting that was going to call for removal of Hooten from office. And in response, Hooten went ahead and resigned. And so,
but is not giving up his bid for state treasurer.
that's right. So that's the other level here, is that he's still running for office. He's running for state treasurer. And you got to, I don't know, you don't have to admire it, but like, there's something to be said for courage in the face of extreme adversity. It makes me think of Councilman Dexhart on Parks and Rec, right?
Right.
Like, just keeps doing stuff even as he's like holding a press conference to address the previous allegations.
Well, it's like that dude that's running for the GOP gubernatorial nomination in Michigan. He got arrested. He got arrested for participating in the January 6th riot and infiltration insurrection at the Capitol, and that has only served to increase his standing in the Republican. He's got a bump in the polls after being arrested. So you know, there's that.
That's wild. Well, and listeners, as a reminder, because turnout in the primary election tends to be very low, much lower than the general election, it means that your vote actually counts more. If fewer people show up and you're one of those people, then your vote has an outsized amount of power. And that's a very important reason why you should turn out to vote, because we want everyone's vote to count. And if no one else is going to show up, then by golly, you showing up there is a way you can help ensure that your opinion or your choice is heard.
I'm just seeing an update here. We have found our second case of monkeypox in Oklahoma. So there's that.
Yeah, we haven't really talked about COVID in a while. I think everyone knows it's still happening. My wife just texted me that her and my daughter went and got PCR tests today because my daughter had a potential exposure at school. The test, at least today, is negative. Although I think the trend lately with Omicron and its subvariants has been that people are often symptomatic for several days before the test shows positive. Is that correct? You're the physician on the show.
You know, it's really variable. I've seen both. I've seen people that, you know, will come in and they're convinced that they've had symptoms for, you know, 4, 5, 6 days. They've done several negative rapids. They don't know what's going on. They maybe even have a negative PCR, and then we'll test them and they pop positive, and it's, you know, day 5, 6, or even 7 of symptoms. But then I've seen kind of more, you know, kind of classic where somebody's, you know, they all of a sudden, just yesterday, all of a sudden 104 fever, really not a ton in the way of respiratory symptoms, some sore throat, some upset stomach, fatigue, body aches, and PCR was positive on within the first 24 hours of symptoms. So I think it's really variable, and the best advice that I have is particularly if you know you've had an exposure and you develop symptoms, um, certainly get tested. But even if you test negative, act like you have it, right? If you're not able to stay home for the recommended 5 days, please wear a tight-fitting medical grade mask when you're out in public for the next 10 days. Try to avoid unnecessary gatherings, restaurants, bars, movie theaters, etc. Just do the things that you would do to try and keep other people safe. Certainly, obviously, talk to your doctor. If you're a high risk individual, meaning you have high risk medical conditions that could predispose you to more severe disease, or if you're over the age of 55 or both, you're eligible for antiviral therapy, which would be Paxlovid, which I have seen be be very helpful in some of my patients that have used it. So we are still definitely, depending on how you generate the numbers. This is one of the issues, is because we're not doing nearly as much testing and so many people are doing home tests now, we don't really have a great handle on exactly what the numbers are. But anecdotally, and I think this is true nationwide, we're actually in our second biggest surge of the entire pandemic in terms of case numbers.
Mm-hmm.
It does appear that the burden of disease this time around is lower, which is excellent. But it certainly is not zero. So just be careful. If you're somebody who has, now is not the time to drop your guard. So I'd say keep wearing masks and taking as many precautions as you can.
Yeah, it's a real frustration. My daughter's daycare had to close on Thursday this week due to a pretty widespread number of cases of COVID. My mother-in-law's had it. I have several friends whose parents have had it. Pretty much if you go outside or travel anywhere and don't mask religiously, there's a good chance you're going to get it, although not 100%. So if you are a listener and you're dealing with it right now, our sympathies are with you. Please get the rest, hydrate, those kinds of things. It's no fun to be miserable and also dehydrated.
For the love, if you're not vaccinated, get vaccinated. If you've had 2 shots but not a third, get a third shot. If you've had 3 shots and you're over the age of 55 or have qualifying conditions, get a 4th shot. Also, God bless, we've got vaccines for kids. Vaccines for kids are on the way, specifically the 6 months to 5-year-olds, 5-year-old age group. That'll be starting probably next week. Being able to get shots in the arms of those kids. So if you are I've got several of them. If you're one of these parents that has been waiting and praying for the last 2 years for shots for your little ones, they're on the way.
I am one of those parents. I'm in that group. My daughter is 2 1/4, and we're very excited. In fact, we went to the doctor today just for a regular checkup and ask about that. And so we're looking at she said probably 2 weeks. So that's a relief coming. Scott, I got a message the other day asking us if we were going to, I don't know, do reviews of some of the political commercials that are on television right now. And I told them no. One, I think listeners probably know, I tend to watch very little current TV. I'm actually rewatching Downton Abbey right now as my kind of wind down in the evenings while I do dishes and kind of tidy up around the house. And so I haven't seen any of these commercials, but from what I've seen, and including Oklahoma City Mayor David Holt tweeted about how awful they are this year. I can only imagine. I see a few on Twitter here and there. And Mayor Holt's thread got me thinking. He tweeted about the extremism, the extreme partisanship of politics today, and how Oklahoma City's city council elections and mayoral elections could be an antidote or a different way to structure elections that would relieve our state of some of this extremism and maybe incentivize candidates to appeal to different groups of voters. Did you happen to see his thread about that the other day?
I did not. I did not. I assume that it was. I assume, like many things he puts out there, that it was very insightful.
Yeah, he's actually had I think 2 threads in the last couple of weeks, and they both kind of centered on the same thing, that Oklahoma City, I think like all other cities in our state, have um, nonpartisan open elections, right? So candidates don't run with a party affiliation, just all voters get to vote. And as a candidate, you're incentivized to appeal to the, however you can get the most voters, right? And I think everybody kind of knows being an extremist on either side is not the path to that in Oklahoma City and most anywhere else.
Sounds like he's certainly on board with open primaries.
Yeah, and so that's the thing. That's the other deal is that regardless of the voters' party affiliation, everybody gets to vote, and there's an election, and if nobody gets a majority, then there's a runoff from the top 2 there. And there's actually an effort underway right now to raise awareness about the impact that closed primaries has on on elections in Oklahoma. Perhaps most notably is that 20% of Oklahoma's voters are registered independents or no party, and they are not allowed to vote in the Republican primaries at all. And because there's so many, the majority of voters are Republican, the majority of candidates are Republican. And so that means that a full 20% of registered voters in our state don't get a voice in that at all. Under the current rules, the Democrats allow them to vote on the Democratic side, but it's it's not even like in that case a partisanship thing. It's just the Republicans wanting only Republican voters to vote in their races. Scott, to me, the problem is that primary elections are paid for with taxpayer dollars, right? This isn't just like a private party popularity contest. These are our elections that we all pay for. Shouldn't all voters be allowed to vote?
I mean, it makes sense to me, Andy. I mean, like, and especially when you look at what it's doing, when you look at what it's doing to our political discourse and our political system, and right, and how far it pushes people to the extremes. Most people reside in the middle, right? Like most people are somewhere in the middle, and so our political system should reflect that.
Right.
And instead, it does the opposite.
Right. Because closed primaries means that candidates from a particular party are running to be the favorite of the people in that party, and that usually means the most Democratic or the most Republican, right? For
Right.
however that's defined at a given time.
Because turnout in primary elections tend to be significantly lower, right? And so it's the most enthusiastic, the most motivated, the most engaged voters, which are going to be the ones that are like, as you said, tend to be outliers, right?
Right.
Within the most committed to the party orthodoxy and platform. And so the closed primary system, what's the word I'm looking for here? It bakes in people that are farther from the center.
Yep.
Particularly when you combine it with the way that our districts are drawn, right?
Yeah.
When our districts are drawn in such a way that a Republican is guaranteed to win District X, a Democrat is guaranteed to win District Y, then all that matters is being the Republican who wins or the Democrat who wins the primary, which means you're going to appeal to the base voters as much as you can.
That's right. And so, if you are interested in learning a bit more about this, you can go to unmuteok.org. That's a project of uh, Oklahomans United for Progress, which is a civic organization here in our state. You can go to Open Primaries Oklahoma. If you just go to openprimaries.us, there's a national group that advocates for this. And the folks at Unmute have a mobile billboard that's going to be traveling our state. It will be in Oklahoma City. Let's see, it'll be in Tulsa. No, I think it was in Tulsa yesterday. It'll be in Norman on Monday the 20th, and then it'll be in Oklahoma City on Tuesday, the 21st. Let me look at my calendar. It'll be in Oklahoma City at Kerr Park downtown around 11:15 on Tuesday morning. It'll be in Norman at noon at Andrews Park on Monday. So if you're around Andrews Park on Monday at noon or Kerr Park in Oklahoma City around 11:15 on Tuesday, stop by. They've got free suckers to hand out. They've got some literature, some educational materials. Those are the scheduled media stops. I think there's also one in Stillwater planned. And so I'm excited. This is something that I've been interested in and honestly supporting for the last several years. And could be a way, I think, particularly when combined with, redistricting reforms, with things like ranked choice voting. There's a way to change the incentives that candidates have for how they try to appeal to voters. That could be really, I think, really positive for our state. And this year, I think we talked about this a few months ago, probably, but there was a bill for open primaries this year. Senator Lonnie Paxton filed it, and it didn't go anywhere this year. But the fact that a somewhat moderate Republican was like, "I'm sick of this. I can't pander to these folks on the fringe." We could change the way things are structured to make it a little more possible for, good civic-minded individuals to win their races.
Absolutely. I mean, it's and that's the thing is, I spend so much time reading and talking about all of this that I go through phases where I'm very optimistic, and then I go through phases where I'm like, it's hopeless, right? And the thing is, there are some real reforms that are doable that could happen in a place like Oklahoma that would drastically improve our political system. And I'm not even talking about like change majority who controls the legislature or change who's going to win the governor's race. I'm not talking about trying to change party control, right? I just think we could get much, much better. There are reforms where we could get much, much better governance than we have, um, because the incentives would be changed, um, and and it does give me, seeing someone like Senator Paxton, carry that bill does give me hope.
Yeah. And, people like Andrew Yang, former presidential candidate, have been championing things like ranked choice voting. There's a political scientist, an author that I follow on Twitter named Lee Drutman. I frequently send you his tweets, Scott. He wrote a book called Breaking the Two-Party Doom Loop. And he is now, so he's identified this problem for a while, and he is really supporting proportional representation. And what that would mean, essentially is like in Oklahoma, the voter registration breakdown is roughly, I think, like 51% Republican, 30-ish% Democrat, and then 19-ish% independent, or something like that. And imagine if the state legislature was proportional to voter registration in our state. That would be such a dramatic change to the percentages there. And imagine having 20% of our state legislature be unaffiliated with any party because they don't like the parties and they choose to not affiliate. That would certainly change a lot of the conversation and the coalitions around this, right? Because then, man, you had 20% that were independent, you would have enough to prevent a like a 3/4 majority for some of these things that would require that. And that would mean that, like, even if the two parties who disagree on stuff somehow got aligned on an issue, there would be another way to kind of check that political power, which I like. I
Right.
like a little good check and balance.
I mean, I think proportional representation would be great. I think it's a much heavier lift. I think proportional representation is a much heavier lift than open primaries and even ranked choice voting.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But
Well,
but
it's also new, right? People get spooked by new things.
yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think on that note, let's wrap it up. That brings us to the end of this episode. Scott, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, man. I'm sorry I missed the last 2 weeks.
Well, we all missed last week.
Well, yeah, and I guess I missed the one before that.
Well, and Bailey is out of town today doing some other good work, so we missed her this week. Listeners, thanks for being here. Stay tuned. We are contemplating, should COVID allow it and it not be 1,000 degrees outside, contemplating some sort of live podcast on the primary election day. We did that. Was that 4 years ago? I remember doing it at Oak and Orr. Do you remember that, Scott?
That was 4 years ago.
That was a
fun. It was a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. Had a lot of great candidates.
Gary Bloomer, Joe Beth.
Gary Bloomer came there. Joe Beth was it. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yep. We started just grabbing people that came in. Was Bo on there with us? There were a lot of folks that came by.
Bo was on there with us. Yeah.
All right. Well,
it was a good time.
Listeners, if you're interested in attending a live podcast and you've got suggestions on venue, let me know. Hit us up on Twitter at Let's Fix This Okay. I am at AndyOKC. Scott is at SC Melson. Or you can always just email us at podcast@letsfixthis.org. With that note, be sure to ask your friends and family if they are registered to vote and remind them to vote on the 28th and invite them to the show if we do one. Thanks a lot. Have a good weekend. And remember, decisions are made by those who show up.